So in my last video I talked about how there's a rapid expansion of what constitutes autism, homosexuality, and pedophilia, and how these new definitions are being weaponized. At the same time, you see a restriction of positive concepts, so a restriction of what constitutes freedom, a restriction of what constitutes medicine, a restriction of what constitutes journalism. So in the case of freedom used to be considered something that rested with the individual. And law was in place to safeguard the freedoms of the individual. Okay? And these freedoms of the individual represented divine realities, and as long as you weren't violating universal ethical principles, you were free to do what you wanted. And now you're seeing a reversal of that, where, according to the relativist model, there aren't universal ethical principles, and so the state endows freedom on the individual, and freedom is whatever the state has decided to give to people. And I think maybe that's what Obama was getting at when he referred to the Constitution as negative liberties, but there's a reason that the Founding Fathers described the freedom the way they did, because the state was really to safeguard the freedom of the individual. Now you're seeing a reversal of that. But in the case of medicine and health, you're seeing a restriction of what constitutes medicine and health. And by the way, with the expansion in certain areas and the restriction in other areas, it gets very hard to talk to people about these concepts, because there's a worldview and an intellectual framework in place, and you have to get at the underlying belly of what these concepts really mean, and which is why we're doing these videos. In the case of medicine, medicine used to be defined as what would make people better, and medicine used to be defined as something that could cure the person. Now, medicine is defined as something that's undergone peer review by magazines that are funded by the pharmaceutical companies. So if new scientific discoveries in the field of medicine don't show up in these publications, then they're not considered valid. So take body talk, for example, where you can ask the body yes or no questions, and people will say, well, that's like a Ouija board. But it's really not. If you can ask the mind and people can respond in words, well, the body has its own intelligence. You should be able to ask the body questions as well. And really, when you think about allopathic medicine, taking a pill that just represses the symptoms rather than cures it, it was really based on the neo-Hegelian philosophies that led to the creation of fascism and Bolshevism, because the same people that were financing the Bolshevism, these were the same people that were revoking the licenses of the naturopathic doctors and revoking the licenses of the naturopathic colleges. Now, in the case of journalism used to be considered, on the basis of its merits. So if an event happened and journalists were able to show and cite their sources and show valid information, this would be enough to counter the official account. Now what you're seeing is that if a journalist isn't associated with certain mainline news organizations, regardless of the merits of what those journalists bring up, they're dismissed as hate speech, as conspiracy theory, as fake news. So, for example, Alex Jones, back when he used to be considered a liberal, when he brought up about the Project for the New American Century, where members of the Bush administration wrote policy papers where they were calling for terrorist attacks and talking about using race-based bioweapons. And when he was interviewing scientists about controlled demolition and talking about Building 7 and the holes with the official accounts, that should have been enough to win the Nobel Prize in journalism. But rather than doing the intellectual business of countering what he was saying, he's dismissed as hate speech, as conspiracy theory, as fake news. And it's very dangerous because when these news events happen, like, for example, the Blasey Ford situation, and he's the only person that's bringing up really, really relevant news, nobody looks at it because it's dismissed in this ad hominem way.